Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Dr. Maja Zelihic, who is a Fulbright specialist, full professor, and department chair of the Advanced Management Studies at the Forbes School of Business and Technology. She is the co-founder of DEMA Innovations. She has quite an impressive background, but she's also the co-author of our latest book, The Power of Perception. It's so nice to have you here, Maja.
Hi, Diane. Nice to be with you.
Oh, it's so fun. We finally got to do this. I mean, we both are so busy. You'd think this would be the first thing we would do. And here we are the months after the book's been released. And yet we're finally getting together to chat about this because we're doing so many other things with the book. But this is going to be a lot of fun. And I know a lot of people probably had heard you on another show I had in the past talking about education and other things. But this time we're going to talk about perception because I think that it's such a fascinating area. But I want to get your backstory, even though we did this before. And for those who maybe missed your other appearance or aren't familiar with your background, how did you get to this Fulbright specialist genius point of your life that you've attained? I'd love to hear.
Well, I actually had quite a bit of experience in the financial industry. I worked in the world of mortgages for quite some time. And eventually I went into corporate training. So I've discovered my love and my passion for education. Once I got my PhD degree, I started working pretty much part-time. And then eventually in 2013, I started being a full-time professor and I discovered my love for research, field research in particular. So I've done lots of research ventures in the developing world. And a couple of years ago, I also became a Fulbright specialist. So I was able to do some research work for the US government and in Zambia in particular. And I was quite thankful for that particular program because it really helps researchers across the world, US researchers across the world, to conduct a lot of different ventures and also discover lots of interesting things.
Well, you've done a lot of great research. And, for those who aren't familiar with Fulbright specialists, I mean, we hear Rhodes Scholar, we hear Fulbright Scholar, we hear all these different things. We know we're smart, they're smart people, but can you tell us what a Fulbright specialist is? I mean, what's Fulbright for people who don't really know?
Sure. But it's actually, unlike Fulbright scholars, a lot of Fulbright scholars start off as students. Fulbright specialists are already established professionals. They don't necessarily have to be in the world of academia per se, even though many of us who become Fulbright specialists are in the world of academia. But we're able to contribute to the body of knowledge as far as doing different research ventures, doing different lectures, partnering and collaborating with different institutions across the world, and enhancing the overall body of knowledge and also helping at the same point of time. So the vast majority of the Fulbright specialist ventures that are being sponsored by Fulbright are in the developing world, where there's some shortages of resources, shortages of subject matter experts, and it is a win-win situation for both parties.
Well, I know you've done a lot of amazing work in the area of business in general, and you and I focused on we thought it would be kind of fun for us to partner and write a book together. And we looked at some of the different options that were out there of kinds of things we wanted to study. And I think that I think we covered a bunch of different ideas when we were looking at this. We both knew we liked behaviors. We both knew we wanted to help, engagement, innovation, and all that. So I know that's kind of the discussion we had to come up with perception. And, what was fun writing with you was you're much better at the historical storytelling aspect of writing. And you got some great stories into our book from just, I know I came up with a couple. I was, the frogs and the different things, but, and that was just from reading other people's stories who had shared that with perception. It's not my best area to come up with stories, but you got into the Greek mythology and different philosophers from the past, and we filtered out, what stuff I did and what stuff you did, and we came together in the middle. And it was kind of fun though, because we were so different in our styles. What was your favorite story that we included in the book that was something that I could have never come up with about perception, and why did it resonate with you?
Well, I think that it was beautiful. It was such a great experience writing this book with you, because we're so vastly different. Our perceptions are vastly different. That's actually what got us to write this book. I think that deep inside, I'm a philosopher and historian. And in my next life, I think that's what I'm going to be. But I do teach and I do research in the field of business. There were several stories. I had to touch upon Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet and the perception of the word rose. Yes. Also, the Plato's Republic inspired me quite a bit with the allegory of the cave. With prisoners, the prisoners chained to the walls of the cave and looking at the shadows.
Tell that a little bit in deep, because I hadn't really explored that story. Give a little background of that story.
Well, the story goes that prisoners were chained to the walls of the caves, and you had puppeteers playing behind their backs, and the prisoners kept looking at the shadows on the walls of the cave, and actually that is their reality. That is the only reality.
That's all they saw. They didn't see what was behind them making those
absolutely shadows. So we were talking about correlating this to the prison of our own minds. How our perception plays tricks with us, and sometimes we're only seeing the shadows of the actual reality versus the true concept of reality. And the Greek philosophers actually dwelled on that concept of, is there such a thing as a true reality? So you and I talked about, is there such a thing as a true business reality?
Yeah. It's interesting, because I've been binge watching things because of COVID, right? And I was watching Fringe again. I don't know if you ever watched Fringe, but I love anything J.J. Abrams. And they were dealing with this superior race, and the observers, as they called them. And the observer was telling the main character that, you don't even know what you don't know, because you're looking up the sky. You're like an ant, and you're this colony, and you're looking up the sky, and you just think it's a dark sky, but it's really the bottom of my shoe about to squish you. And I thought, it's interesting, because I've read a lot of books like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I listen to his book at night a lot, Death by Black Hole, I think it is. And he talks about how in science you have to know when to get really up close and when to back up, because it's like a painting. If you get really close, all you see are brush strokes and you don't really see the painting. But if you get back, you get to see the whole picture. And so I think when we were talking about this perception thing, that was a great story of the allegory of the cave, because you don't know what people are seeing. They have a limited amount of information, perhaps. And kind of like the frog story, tell the frog story, because I love the frog story.
Well, the two tadpoles were swimming in the pond, and one jumped out and became a frog. And after a short while, she came back, and the tadpole asked, "Where did you go?" And the frog said, "Where it's dry." And the tadpole said, "Well, where is dry?" And the frog said, "Well, when there's no water." And the tadpole said, "What is water?" And then the frog laughed, saying, "Well, it's all around you." Sometimes we're in the midst of our own reality, or the reality that our mind created. We're in that own cave of our minds. And we're not able to see what's around us, and we're in the midst of it. So that's why we're saying, when we're making decisions, sometimes the best decision makers are not the ones that are impacted by those decisions the most. And speaking of a couple of things that you just mentioned, it's kind of like a matrix. What's a true reality versus the reality that we see? And you go back and forth from those two. Another thing is with research, being further removed from the research venture, you have to have a healthy amount of passion towards a particular research topic, but you cannot be too passionate about it, because if you're too passionate about a particular research topic, you're going to steer the findings in the direction of your own preference.
Yeah, we both have had the students going through the doctoral program that tell you what their study is going to tell you at the end, and they haven't even done it yet, right? I'm like, no, you can't do that. You don't know. We don't want to push things in a certain direction, but we do that with life. And I know I started out with these stories because I think a lot of people, when they're thinking perception, they're thinking about, do you see the blue dress or the gold dress, or do you see the cigar in the wall, or is the dot the same size over here as it is over here? And those are perception fun things to talk about. Had a lot of great people on the show. Bo Lotto is a great perception expert, has some wonderful TED Talks about that. But what we were looking at was the impact of having the understanding of other people's vantage points and the things that go into the process of perception. And so I had come off of creating the Curiosity Code Index and writing about curiosity. And because I had, done the factor analysis and learned how to do that, Maja and I thought, well, this would be fun to figure out how to measure the factors that impact perception. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, I know we've talked about it. We've thought of it kind of as IQ, perception kind of as IQ, EQ for emotional quotient, CQ for curiosity quotient, and CQ for cultural quotient. But the factors didn't really line up specifically that way. And we found that there was some overlap. And so we look at it as more of a process of how we call it an epic process of how we evaluate, predict, interpret, and then correlate to make our conclusions. But why do you think it's so important that we figure out this process and explain this and help people take these kinds of assessments in the workplace? What was your motivation behind that?
Well, our index and the training program, we are already seeing some of the results. It's helping the companies out there in order for them to tap into the potential of their employees' perception, in order to get them more motivated and more effective at a workplace. I think that when we ventured out to do this research, it kind of started as a fun conversation between the two of us as we worked together, because we realized that our perceptions are vastly different. And dwelling on what's impacting our perception from our culture, from our experiences, our gender, lots of different things that were playing into why you in particular see things a certain way versus the way I'm looking at things. So if the business leaders are trying to communicate to their employees, business reality is an ever fluid concept. And we just talked about Plato and is there such a thing as a reality? Well, when it comes to the way business leaders communicate, when it comes to the way they lead, it is very important for them to realize the way they project whatever they're trying to project, the way they're being perceived. It's a two-way street, and to ensure that their message comes across the way it's intended to their employees. And if the employees get the receiving message, if they misunderstand what the message was intending to convey, they can get demotivated and not being good performers at work. That is why that's the why behind why for the companies, why for the employees. Right. So assessing one's own perception mechanism is of a crucial importance in order to be a better leader and also, frankly, a better employee. And as much as both of us are researchers and in the world of academia, it's important to note for the audience members that we wrote this book that it is easily processed by general audience members. It can be of use to someone, of course, first and foremost in the business world, but also in our personal lives as well. Our perception is impacting the way we interact at a personal level as well.
Well, you bring up so many important points. And I think that what we were looking at was, some of the things that influence perception, but also how perception influences other things, right? So we know, for example, things that influence perception are things like our intelligence, our spirituality, our curiosity, our emotions, our culture, our gender, experience, all those kinds of things. But perception then influences some of the things you're talking about, leadership, innovation, status quo thinking, engagement, collaboration, all the things that people are losing money on in the workplace, because we know people are hired for their knowledge, but fired for their behaviors, right? And if we don't recognize that these soft skills and some of these behaviors are what the companies are working on right now to try and solve some of these problems, emotional intelligence, leadership, collaboration, engagement. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars, and we know it's 550 billion alone just on engagement, and the leadership, collaboration, emotional intelligence pieces, all that, it all ties into this. And I think that you talk about how we're so different. But we have, which is interesting because we've had unique experience, similar experiences. And as you were giving your background, I was thinking about, I worked in the mortgage industry. I've worked, in the sales like you have. Teaching like you have. We worked in the same company. I've been your boss. You've been my boss. We've maybe for different periods of time, but we've had the same kinds of experiences, and yet we are so uniquely different. Now, a lot of it can be cultural. We're both from different parts of the world. A lot of it can be family. A lot of it can be, obviously, we're both the same gender, but we have a lot of these things that we write about in the book. And it's a fascinating look at how important understanding perception is, because even two kids, anybody who's had more than one kid, I'll tell you that they're completely different, even Absolutely. If they're raised in the same house. So for us, we were looking at the importance of understanding what goes into your decision-making process, right? And if right now people are so conflicted in so many ways, we have a divide in politics, we have a divide in all these different areas, right? But a lot of it is a lack of empathy and the ability for us to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Mm-hmm. And that's really what understanding perception, a lot of it boils down to. How can we see things from some other people's vantage points, not changing our stance, not changing what's important to us, but recognizing, okay, they have the right, they have the background, they have whatever reason for having this sense of this is why this should be that way. I think that you and I both know from we both ran the MBA program at the Forbes School of Business and Technology. And I know when we were designing different things there, we were looking at how can we incorporate critical thinking and how can we incorporate soft skills, right? And to do that, you have to have this sense of the value of for people to have that ability to take data and take information and compare and contrast and come up with an idea. I'm curious, how much do you think social media and just external influences are impacting people's work relationships? Because they're seeing one thing or another. There's this confirmation bias that we hear a lot about, which is, I believe this, so I'm going to keep reading more about this, and it just reinforces what I believe. Do you think social media is making it harder?
Absolutely. It's actually some of the blessings of our generation is that we have easy access to data. But one of the curses of our generation is that we have too much data, and as we're swimming through the data, what we're trying to do, we're trying to confirm our own beliefs. Mm-hmm. We talk about it in the book. And we use the terminology of suspending our beliefs. And keep in mind, as you mentioned, we're not asking anyone to abandon their belief system or to abandon what they stand for. Just the suspension as they're observing others, especially to be a global leader, one has to be an open-minded individual that is actually in tune with what others are saying and being able to observe at first. So suspension of one's beliefs is allowing you to not necessarily embrace the beliefs of others. That is not the point. The point is to understand the beliefs of others. And in order to be a successful leader, you have to do that. We now know with the social media, there were a few different, there was a good documentary on Netflix. The word escapes me right now as far as the title.
Well,
but
I know it escapes me. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Algorithms that we're actually being fed what our preference is. And I think that that's pretty devastating. Mm-hmm. Because the way you learn, the way you open your mind, the way you understand others, and sometimes even embrace the beliefs of others, is to be able to get to that other side of the spectrum, to be able to view the other vantage point. Therefore, I think those algorithms are really not doing us any service, because all they're doing is, if I'm in a favor of ABC view, all I'm seeing is confirming that.
Yeah, I think that we need to get the message out to people that it's some of your own responsibility to don't always read the same things, don't always go to the same source. And that we're back to the critical thinking thing. And I think that companies can help in that respect with people, to get people much more open to different ways of doing things. And I know a lot of companies do a great job with cultural training to some extent. I know IBM does some training for the spouses, even that they make sure that they go and I'm sorry, Coca-Cola does the spouses, but IBM has the cultural training to make sure that they have really deep cultural understanding of an area before people go in. And so they talk about decision-making styles based on that culture. And they talk about all these different things with people. And then the Coca-Cola one, which I alluded to, was, they make sure the wife goes through or the husband goes through the program as well, because if your spouse doesn't feel comfortable in a culture, that's going to be a problem for in so many ways, right? And so I know HBR had 40 case studies on this, and McKinsey's got some research on this. SHRM's got research on this. There's no shortage of the value of, having the ability for people to work together. When I taught different courses, when I trained different groups about working together on teams, it was really kind of fun to put a bunch of people. What I would do is I'd put a bunch of people who had the same kind of values and norms of personality type in one group. And I'd put another group where they were very diverse and had all these different types of preferences, right? And the group that was very similar, you would give them Legos and you would ask them to build a house. Mm-hmm. And they built a house. It was pretty boring, actually. It wasn't a very good house. And then you go to the group of diverse people where they're all unique. They'd build you this castle and a moat, and it'd be a really cool thing. But okay, so you get a better output if you have a diverse workplace. Of course, you have more issues because you have a diverse workplace and people don't have that understanding of everybody's perception. And that's really what we were trying to get at with our research. So let's talk about the EPIC model, just because that was such a big part of what we wanted to discuss. We started with just sending out lots of different surveys, and we looked at thousands of people, and we researched this in the United States for quite a while. And we were looking for factors that aligned to perception, and we would eliminated the ones that the questions that did not work. And then we ended up coming up with this EPIC process. And that was kind of a fun process to find out what are the things that tie into this. And the first thing that we found was evaluation. And evaluation's really self-control, composure, acceptance, body language, tone. A lot of it is the first part of emotional intelligence, which is, how do I understand my vantage point and how I see things? And why do you think evaluation is so critical in the perception process? Why do we need to know our own point? I mean, why did you think that was an interesting factor?
It starts with us. We have to reflect. We have to reflect on our own selves, because a lot of times there is a misalignment between what I think I'm projecting versus what I'm projecting.
Right.
So being aware of the way I come across is going to impact my leadership abilities. It's also going to impact every single interaction that I have with any individuals in my life. So recently I wrote a very short blog story about a leader when I worked in the financial industry that was actually reprimanded by his superiors because every single member of his team complained about him. And as he was exiting the conference room, I was witnessing him saying, "But I'm an excellent leader." And at the time, of course, I was not thinking about perception. I was just thinking in terms of, oh my goodness, he's so clueless.
Right.
However, his perception of his own self, of his own leadership capabilities, was completely off. So we have to start with our own selves. And we also have to clearly define our opportunities. When you and I, in a joking manner, when we interacted, you did notice that at times I would jump to a conclusion without necessarily, even though I'm a researcher in a professional life, in my personal life, I would skip all the research steps. I would go to the worst case scenario. And a lot of times you kept me in check saying, wait a second, let's stand back, reflect on this. Yeah. So I'm aware of my opportunities. You are aware of your own opportunities. It is connected to our intelligence, to our emotional intelligence, our life experiences. We are not necessarily changing who we are at the very core of our being, but we're able to improve. Life is the process of constant improvement. That is why evaluate matters.
Well, and it is so important what you're saying. Such a big part of emotional intelligence is that ability to understand your own emotions and react appropriately. And it takes some evaluation. You were talking about that leader. It brought to mind, Travis Bradbury had some research he likes to talk about with CEOs having lower levels of emotional intelligence after a certain point. And I've talked to a lot of people on the show about this, and they will say that, you might get promoted for have higher levels at the beginning because you're around people who, you're having good conversations and you're interacting and you're having a certain experience with people that is developing your emotional intelligence. And then after a while, you're promoted to this point where everybody's kind of agreeing with you and you're getting unlimited exposure to certain real feedback and that kind of thing. And so I think 360 evaluation can be important. When Daniel Goleman was on my radio show, we talked about that. He does some amazing work in that area. I know that, I do some emotional intelligence testing on my site. And I think that anytime you can figure out, where you are, you can figure out where you need to go. And so we look at the evaluation process, and then we looked at the prediction process, which I love the EPIC acronym to make it easy to remember. But the P from the EPIC is prediction. And prediction, a lot of that is the second half of emotional intelligence in some respects, because you've got to understand the emotions of others. You have to develop empathy so that you can, see their vantage point and understand where they're coming from, which requires curiosity to have that empathy. You have to be interested enough to ask questions, to get that sensitivity, to look for what's important to others. And why do you think prediction is such a critical part of this process?
Well, you're trying to increase your odds of making the right decision. You're increasing your chances of success. So, empathy and being a decent human being aside, which is those are major components. I'm trying to predict what you're thinking. I'm trying to predict what you're perceiving in order for us to have a terrific business relationship. Therefore, prediction is also a protective mechanism for me. Because I'm trying to get into a situation where we have a successful dialogue and we're effective as business leaders. Yeah. So it is on top of being a great human being. So I'm anticipating your reaction, and I do this through trial and error. Sometimes I'm doing this through the life experience. I make mistakes in predicting. It is very important for me, as I'm projecting whatever I'm trying to project, that I can predict how whatever I'm doing is going to reflect on your end, and how you're going to perceive who I am as an individual, as a business leader.
Yeah, it is that back and forth. And that was such a big part of it. And then as we progressed and looked at the steps, we recognized that interpretation of the EPIC process was interpretation, brought in a lot of reasoning. And again, the curiosity, the logic, the culture aspects. Now that I have considered emotions and the way I believe, and figured out what I can expect from you, I have to interpret what I've learned and recognize the impact of things like culture, religion, spirituality, all of that, whether I agree or disagree with their idea of what's important. It's understanding that this is what has influenced this part of it. So we have to understand how this interpreting can be impacted. Why is interpretation so important?
Well, I think it's a higher level. You and I, we interact quite a bit on a personal level. And I think we gain a great sense of appreciation through our conversation, where both of us are coming from. And we also know, at times as we're sharing certain stories, there are times we do not agree. Right. When it comes to a particular point. However, we have this level of being able to interpret, this level of appreciation for why you feel a certain way, why you perceive things a certain way. So a lot of times as we go back and forth in our conversations, we acknowledge that. So once you acknowledge that, you're also able to move forward in a more successful manner. So that's why it's important. It is a higher level of interaction. And at that point of time, I know I evaluated my own self. I know how I come across, hopefully. And then I'm also able to predict the way you're perceiving whatever I'm saying. And we're putting it all together. We're interpreting what that means. It's now truly a two-way street. And emotional intelligence in that particular instance is of crucial importance, and the critical thinking. Intelligence as well. Intelligence is always important, but not as important as the other two, because at that point of time, we are gaining that sense of understanding. And during that phase, we are in the process of at times suspending our beliefs as we're trying to learn about others.
Yeah, and you brought it to how we're coming to this conclusions at the end, and really that takes correlation to get to these conclusions. You take everything, the final C in EPIC is correlation. So we're getting that understanding. We're seeing that other vantage point. We're taking in their into account their experience, and we're taking into account things like gender and other aspects that really have shaped who they are and what they've experienced. And for you to come to a conclusion without taking in all these puzzle pieces, you're missing out on the big picture. It's almost like my analogy before of looking at the painting. Maybe you're too close and you're only seeing brush strokes. When you're back, you can see the whole picture. And so what is so important about the correlation part of the process?
Well, we're putting it all together. We're connecting all the dots. And at that point of time, hopefully we're making good choices. We're making good decisions. We're moving forward, and we're becoming truly successful. Correlation is taking into consideration all the variables we mentioned. And we're not necessarily always aware of the fact that we're correlating, but at that point of time, we're actually gathering, we have the whole data pool, and we're putting it all together. And we're still trying, even during the correlation period, we're still trying to make sense out of it.
Yeah.
And because we talked about the fluid concept of business, or any reality for that matter. And we will, our goal through this index, our goal through the training, our goal through the book is absolutely not for everyone to perceive things the same way or to think the same way.
No.
That would defy the purpose. Our goal is for folks to have an understanding and appreciation of this process.
Yeah. And you were saying, it's not possible anyway for people to all have the same outlook. And we looked at some of the differences, just men and women. And I just wanted to just bring up a couple of them, because I know you have, you and I both were talking about how this was interesting. We saw that men were more likely to say they didn't allow stress to impact how they interacted with other people. And they were more likely to believe that they openly displayed happiness, which I'm just want to list a couple things that men had different. They were also more likely to believe that a person's health can impact their decision making, and they did not view race and age as much of an issue in decision making as women. And that last one was interesting to me because perhaps they didn't have the same negative probably experience in the business world that women might have experienced when they first entered, as far as their race and their gender did impact a lot of how people experienced what they did and how they experienced their work situation. We also found men were more likely to believe other people might come to conclusions about their decisions without doing research, where women were more likely to believe others can allow their perception of someone's gender to impact, like I said, their decisions. They were more likely to recognize the conclusions people made were based on information that's been translated, and that could have inaccuracies. And women were more likely to see that others might not conform to their ethical beliefs, that other cultures, they might see their beliefs as more valid than the men did. And we didn't see huge differences in our research data, but I think it's kind of important to recognize that the data did have some challenges. Of course, we could do more research, and we probably will. But what did you find the most interesting about the data?
Well, actually, prior to discussing the data, one of the stories that actually you put in the book that I found fascinating was the story of a gentleman and a lady in a museum looking at the painting. Mm-hmm. And the lady was saying, "Oh, look at the sun, the way it's hitting the barn. Look at the old man's face being so serene and so peaceful, and the light and the grass, and and the gentleman was looking at the painting saying, wow, that barn is so old and it needs painting job." With that said, it's oversimplifying our differences, but that story demonstrates that we are looking at things differently. I mean, women are still more likely to accept, to an additional task at work for free
Mm-hmm.
without asking to be compensated. Women are still way more likely to suppress their natural tendencies in order to come across as stronger, because they're trying to mimic whatever they think the male leadership should be. And there were research studies where men and women made the same decisions, used the same verbiage, communicated almost identical. And the man was perceived as being strong, and the woman was being perceived as being too aggressive. So we cannot necessarily minimize these differences. We can say that they do play a part. And also looking at the data, I think that our goal again is not for the beauty of this universe is that we are, men and women, we do perceive a few things differently, but we complement each other.
Yeah.
And that's what the strength of a true leadership is, talking about diversity that you were mentioning earlier, where when you have differences of opinions and diverse approaches, that's when the companies are making the best results. So acknowledging the differences, acknowledging how ladies are still to this day perceived in the world of business. We are still working and struggling a little bit in order to reach that fluid concept of equality in a business world. And it will happen, I mean, with more women being high level ranking leaders, but we also should not change into, I'm a firm believer that we should not suppress our femininity, and we should not suppress our natural empathy and we have some strong points, and our male counterparts have some strong points. So let's take advantage of both of those.
You're talking about stories from the book, and one of them came to mind as you were saying that, which really I think is one of my favorite stories from the book, was the two salespeople who went into a presentation and had their rear ends handed to them basically after they presented their idea. And they came out of the event with I think it was the woman that we had to have this idea that was like the best thing that could have ever happened, because she found out all the things to fix, where the guy was going, well, that was the worst thing ever. We were just destroyed in there. And I think that recognizing that some of this perception of how you look at things, we fail forward now. We don't fail as such a bad thing. We look at failure as, well, what did I learn? And it's not necessarily, this is like the end of whatever we could have ever been. And things have changed through the generations. And as I entered the workplace when it was very Mad Men, and it's been great to see the progression. And so part of what we were hoping to do was, of course, go to organizations and train people, just like I do with my Curiosity Code Index. We do with the Perception Power Index. We give it to organizations where the employees can find out where they have problems or issues within the EPIC process, and where they have areas to grow. It's not labeling them into any group or any category or anything like that. It's more like how we do with emotional intelligence testing, where we go, okay, well, here's where we stand. This is where we have room to grow. And so we learn the factors, we learn to access the information that's impacting these factors. And in the training that we do, we give kind of a personal SWOT analysis that they are able to look at their weaknesses and opportunities, and their weaknesses, and their strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats, to kind of formulate these measurable goals, and just as they would in doing kind of engagement training, that they incorporate into their personal development plan. And so this is the kind of thing that they refine as needed as they go along. Now, we do this in conjunction with companies, but we also have SHRM, recertification credit for those who want to become certified to do this. And if they go on to the website, which is perceptionpower.com. Is that the most recent one? And DimaInnovations.com. We could go to drdianehamilton.com. They're all, and MajaZelihic.com. You could find us through all of them, actually. And they can take the training if you have HR people or are consultant, and you give DISC or different assessments, and you're looking for something very relevant to the time of what people are looking to do, and you can become certified to give the assessment and train in organizations and still get SHRM recertification in the process. But what do you want companies to know about the training and what they get when we come out to train, or if they're a consultant and they want to become certified? What do you think is the most important thing for them to take away?
Well, I think they can evaluate where they stand. They can get into a higher level of understanding of their employees' perceptions. And in order to tap into its potential, in order to motivate their employees, and in order to assess where what type of things are impacting the perception mechanisms of their employees, as they're trying to build new leaders and as they're trying to make the current leaders stronger. So it is tied to both the motivation and the effectiveness. And ultimately that results in a higher bottom line. So those are some of the core things that companies can gain through taking the training and the assessment. And as we mentioned previously, the book is geared towards not only business professionals, but the general audience members. One does not necessarily have to read the whole book prior to the training, but we are assigning different chapters from the book as we go through the training material. It is easy to take, but it's also a very fun and engaging activity. And it's definitely something that their employees can take advantage of as they're polishing their perception in their personal lives as well.
You know what I think people really like about it is that, you know, there's a couple activities we do in the training. And the first one is, you know, you find out your results and you know where you need to go and how to solve any, you know, perception issues. But then the second half of the training, which I really think when you're getting certified to give this, if you're an HR professional or a consultant, that you would really like, is the fact that we do an overall company evaluation. And if you're talking to the leadership, you know, they may be saying, we want to work on innovation, we want to work on collaboration, we want to work on critical thinking, whatever it is that they're wanting to work on. We go to the trainees in this session and we go, okay, so now that you understand the perception process and how to improve it for yourself, how can we work on these issues and solve the perception problem to solve, you know, leadership's communication issues? And we go through all the issues that are really important to the leaders. And then the trainer, whether it's Maja or me or a consultant or whoever is giving this training, has all this feedback from employees, and it's anonymous, so people feel comfortable giving it. And it goes back and we can create this report. We give it to leadership. And so basically employees are giving you all this great content. You get this report, the leadership gets all the answers. It's kind of like when Disney was having a turnover problem in their laundry division, and they went to their employees and they said, how can we make your job better? Well, they gave them all these really great suggestions. Put an air vent over my desk, have my desk go up and down so my back doesn't hurt. I mean, you don't realize how much you can get by going to employees and asking, especially if it's anonymous. And so we're this wall between, you know, having them have the sense of comfort because they know they can say, this would make this better. This would help in this area of perception. This would help me help you guys be better at having us be innovative or agile or whatever it is that you're trying to work on. So that's an important part. What do you think? Is there anything else that I've missed that you want to talk about in terms of the training? I want to make sure. I know we cover a lot.
I think you covered a lot. It's a valuable data pool for the leadership to use and take advantage of in the future months. And also it is, I think it's a self-reflection tool. How often, a lot of times as I presented some topics from our book among business leaders, students, HR professionals, the feedback that I'm getting is that they found the self-assessment incredibly valuable. Because sometimes it's very hard for us to pinpoint what's impacting the way we perceive the world, because it's not one topic that one dwells on. It's just such a integral part of our being. So it is a two-way street. It's benefiting the employees through the reflection. It's benefiting the employer through gathering that data. And as the leaders communicate moving forward, hopefully they can use that in order to communicate better, in order to ensure that they are, whatever they're trying to project, whatever they're trying others to perceive is actually taking place within the workplace.
our work is getting a lot of attention. I was thinking of recently how we were contacted by the startup that was creating a way to interview people without having their name or their picture and all these different things come up that might influence perception. So they were looking at us for their board, and there's so much potential for cultural experts on these boards, because this is such a huge area. I know I do a lot with curiosity, and now we do both a lot with perception. And I think it's good to add some action items that people can be working on. As we go through the EPIC process, I'm going to just put a question out there to people for evaluation. How do you use interpersonal skills like self-assessment to determine how you come across to others? For prediction, how do you use interpersonal skills, curiosity, and empathy to predict how others are going to interact with you? For interpretation, how do you assign meaning to the beliefs and culture of others by using critical thinking, reasoning, and logic? And for correlation, how do you come to conclusions based on considering all parties' vantage point and life experience? I think that those are critical things, because, there is no truth. There's only perception is a very often stated citation. And I think that there is just our perceptions and how we handle the perceptions of others. And so this was so much content. Trying to put that in a book, that was fun, wasn't it, Maja?
It was fun. It was wonderful working with you. We have two different styles, and I think that was the beauty of it. Coming together, and you were not I was so impressed with all the knowledge that you had and all the folks that you actually interviewed, and you were sharing a lot of that knowledge with our readers, and you also were not getting annoyed with my stories.
Your stories add so much. No, we did really well. I think that we had a good friend of ours help us with the organizing of the material, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention G. Ross Kelly, who has died since we have launched this book, and we dedicated this book to him, and he was such an amazing influence in our work. And I've worked with him on other aspects of things I've written. He is an amazing individual, so I hope he continues to be an influencer on everything I do, and I know Maja, you felt the same. And so we did dedicate this book to him. And I think that the thing we'd like people to realize is that even though we're educators and we write this boring other scholarly stuff for our education jobs, this book is not written in that way. It's very readable. It's meant for everyday people with stories, just like you would in any other light reading business book. And we wanted it to be accessible to all individuals. And, when I wrote about curiosity and when I wrote about emotional intelligence, this one kind of reminded me of that, in the fact that the people who need it sometimes may not be looking for it. And as a leader, we got emotional intelligence to be so important because leaders started to recognize that companies need to train their people to develop these important skills. And I hope that those of you who are leaders who are listening to this recognize the value of curiosity, the value of perception, the value of emotional intelligence. These soft skills are what's going to build your employee base to be really effective. Would you have anything to add to the soft skills aspect?
Well, I think we covered it quite a bit. I think that first of all, I think the word global leader is a bit obsolete nowadays, because one cannot be a leader in today's time and age without being a global leader or having that global outlook. I do feel that leaders worldwide will have to find some new ways to polish their performance and to do better. And I think things such as polishing your perception, your curiosity, critical thinking skills, emotional intelligence is the way to go. So I think it's a great value to the leaders worldwide, and those of you who are not yet leaders but you're aspiring to be leaders. And yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned Ross, a gentle, humble, and knowledgeable soul. Yeah. And he's definitely still with us in spirit. And we miss him dearly. I'm glad you mentioned him.
Yeah, I think that this has been a great experience. And I think this book actually, if there is any kind of good timing at all, and everything that's coming out now is such bad timing of everything. But I think what we're learning through COVID and some of the stuff that people are going through is we're seeing a different perception. Think of the perception of online learning a year and a half ago compared to now. Think of the perception of working virtually at home a year and a half ago versus now. We're seeing that we're having to be adaptable, agile, pivoting, all the top words you hear out there. But what that helps is we're working on our perception of what we need to do to be successful in the business world. And so that's really what we were hoping to do with our research. And I think we did a good job, Maja. This was fun, right?
Yeah. No, it did. I think we have.
I think we did. And thank you so much for being such a great co-author and for being on my show, because I've been dying to do this. I'm glad we finally got together. And I think that a lot of people can benefit, and we can, they can contact us through our websites. Of course, follow us on LinkedIn. I'm at Dr. Diane Hamilton, and you're at Dr. Maja Zelihic, and that's Mazelihic. Did I get that?
Yes.
Okay. And you can follow us on all the social media platforms, but the Power of Perception book is obviously on Amazon and Borders and everywhere you find books. And the Perception Power Index is on. It's really easy to go to perceptionpower.com. And the Power of Perception. Which one did we end up with on that one? I want to make sure.
I think you'll probably have to link it as part of this show. So we don't steer people in the wrong way. But it's such a pleasure to always talk to you, and especially talking about this topic. So I'm glad we're able to do this 4.5 months after the book was published, because we were busy talking to different companies, HR professionals, and talking about this at different venues. So we finally found time to talk to each other.
Okay. Well, I agree with that. And it's perceptionpowerindex.com. So I want to make sure I got that right. It's perceptionpowerindex.com for my website. People who are transcribing this, please be sure that we get people to the right place. But this was so much fun. Thank you, Maja. And hey, I'm excited for what's your next book? Do you have one in you?
I've contributed a chapter into with international research handbook.
Uh-huh.
So my chapter covers different research ventures I've done in Haiti, Cuba, Zambia, and Mexico. So I'm very excited about that. We have a publisher, Francis and Taylor, in the UK. So that is an exciting thing. And then later on, I don't know, we're going to think about something else.
Yeah. Because I think that this is something, maybe we'll get this as a MOOC, as a massive open online course. I know my Curiosity course is available on Future Learn. So maybe we'll put that out there on some of those sites. And in the meantime, you can take a perception course. Everything's on our websites. So drmajazelhic.com and drdianehamilton.com. If you can't find the Perception Power, go to our websites and you can find out more. But thank you for being on the show, Maja. This was so much fun.
Thank you. And thank you to all of your listeners. Thank you so much, Diane.
Oh, you're welcome.